Okay, well, welcome everybody. It is 1, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is part 2 of our online software training. For those of you who've been following along with the invitations, we started this back in June, and Stan has been kind enough to come and host these sessions. And so we ran part 1 in June and July, and now we're doing part 2. Which I would imagine will probably run again as well, just to allow additional folks to be able to sit in on this. We are trying to keep these to a smaller audience so we can try and make it a little bit more interactive and make the experience a little bit different than a typical webinar might be. So we're looking forward to having part 2 here today. Just some housekeeping before I turn things over to Stan. As I said, we do like to try and make these a little bit interactive. So if you have the ability, if you have a microphone and have a question and want to actually ask it live, that's something we can definitely accommodate. So what I would recommend is just raising your hand, which you can find that option on your little control panel, and that'll indicate to me that you've got a question you want to ask to Stan. And when the time is right, I'll just go and unmute you, and you can ask your question, and Stan can answer it. Or the other option, you can just type in a question into the questions box, and I'll be happy to then ask that question on your behalf. So those are our options there. And without further ado, I will toss the screen over to Stan and let him take it away.
Thank you, Maureen, and good afternoon, everybody. If you guys have any questions later on, like Maureen said, I'll be stopping in between periodically throughout the session here. Just make sure that if you guys have questions, you can go ahead and actually ask the question to me, or if you have, if you don't have the mic, just go ahead and type it for Maureen to actually ask me. I'll be just going over real quickly over, what we did last month for part 1. And after that, I'll be showing you guys how to create your first route. I'm going to go over the communications tab. And lastly, I'm going to go through and actually do and show you guys how to upload and download your first route to your UltraProbe. So real quickly, from last month, from part 1, we talked about the system requirements to run DMS. And we talked about our edit preferences, where you can actually change your languages, the type of units, currency, and so on. We talked about the backup settings, the paths where your DMS plant folder is actually located, and where your backup folder and the spectralizer path is located. Again, you can actually see all this on our website. You can actually click on that and to get a refresher on that part 1. And then after that, after I discussed the edit preferences from last month, we talked about the different levels of the hierarchy within your DMS plant. So, I talked about the plant level, the application level, the group level, the machine or location level, and then we talked about the points and then the historical records. And then at the very end of part 1, I discussed our walkthrough and how important that is to do the walkthrough. If you guys remember, for some of you guys that were on here last month, I talked about how it is so much better to actually go through it, as a straight line for your route. You don't want to zigzag back and forth because you're just wasting time. So what we're going to do now is, let me close this plant. I actually went out and did a walkthrough. And I'm going to show you what that actually looks like. So what I did is I went through our facility and I picked out a specific room, which is called the machine room. My machine room will be my group name. Now, the machine room or group name is very vital because this is where we're going to be uploading and downloading our information to and from our UltraProbe. So what I did is I broke it up into sections. Basically, over on the left-hand side, I have all my machine names. I got my motors and my pumps. And then on the right-hand side, I have a list of all my bearings that are associated with each individual machine. So if we look at motor 1, for instance, we have two bearings. We have a motor outboard side and a motor inboard side. And if we look below that, we have a pump that's attached to this first motor, and I call that pump 1. So I'm just going with the workflow of my route. And I'm trying to keep it as straight as possible. So within this machine room, I have a total of 12 machines, and each one of these actually have 2 bearings. So I have a total of 24 points. So what I did is once I wrote this down, I just went ahead and just validated to make sure that everything was going in a nice, clean order, going in as much of a straight line as possible. And once I'm happy with that, I can actually then transfer this information that I just written down on a piece of paper and put it into my DMS. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create our first route. And what we need to do is go over to our File tab, and we want to choose New Plant. When we click on New Plant, we have this New Plant wizard that pops up. It'll give us an area to create a name for a plant. It could be almost anything. It could be a location that, you know, a facility that you're actually working at if you're a contractor, but if you're like me, I come to UE Systems every single day. I really don't need to put down UE Systems because I know where I am every single day. So it could be a specific area within my company of UE Systems, or if you got multiple buildings in that facility, you can actually create a name of the building. So it could be like building, building 25, for instance. Underneath that will be our application type. So this will be the application that we're going to be doing. In this case, we're actually doing a bearing route. So I hit the drop-down menu. We're going to click on bearing, and then our group name. Again, if I bring up my route that I've actually created on the piece of paper, I called it the machine room. So this is a specific area within my company that I'm focusing in on my data collection. So within the group name, I should just type in machine room. And again, this is where our building 25, our plant name, is going to be located. It's going to be located in my DMS plant folder on my local drive. Now, this is going to be different, you know, depending on how you guys have this thing set up. You can actually have this plant folder located on your network drive, so it might not say C drive. It could be X drive, H drive, or whatever. And then over here is our descriptor format or character format. And basically what this is you have 2 options. You can do the 13.3 format or the 8.8 format. And what this means is that you actually have 16 characters that you can use to create a name for your location or machine and the name for your test point. So we can actually have 13.3, which means we actually have 13 characters that we can actually use for the naming of our machine, and 3 characters for the naming of our bearing. And then down below, 8 and 8, we basically broke that in half. So you can actually have 8 characters for the name of your machine and 8 characters for the name of your bearing, or in this case, my bearing points. So I'm just going to leave it on my 8 and 8 format. We're going to click on Next. Oops, sorry, I'm going to have to change that name. I was doing this yesterday. So we're going to do Building 20 now. Click on Next. And now we actually have a Create Group. This is where we're actually going to create names for all of our machines and all of our test points for this one particular group. So if I look back at my route that I created, our first machine name would be Motor 1. And then we actually have our 2 test points, MOB and MIB. So I come over here to my location, and we're going to type in Motor 1. Now, if you notice, I put a space in between the letter R and the number 1. Bear in mind, when you guys use a space in between any lettering or numbers, it counts as a character. So if I happen to create a name, let's say Motor 125, for instance, and I come over here to my point, you can see that it only takes the first 8 characters. So it counts the space as a character. So if you want to keep it as Motor 125, for instance, you have to eliminate the space and make it look like that. So if I come back to my point, then we can actually have our full name. Now this could be different. You can have a change if it goes beyond 8 characters for the machine. I would prefer that you guys use a 13.3 format. So I go back to motor 1, hit my tab key to proceed to the next area, which will be my point, and then I do MOB for my motor outboard bearing. Hit the tab key twice to get back to the point just below and create MIB. Now the next one, we have a new machine, and that's called pump 1. So we type in pump 1, and then we type in the associated bearings that are connected to this bearing, to this machine, which is PIB for pump inboard, POB for pump outboard, and then we can proceed on to the next machine. You keep doing this over and over again until you're through with your route that you actually created on this piece of paper. Now if you guys look very closely, everything's pretty much repetitive. Everything's motor 1, pump 1, you know, motor pump, and then the bearings over here is consistent with MOB, MIB, PIB, and POB, and so on. So instead of typing this over and over again, we can actually cheat it a little bit. And what we can do is we can actually copy this by highlighting one of the corners down here or up here. And if we hold down our left mouse button, if we just drag it to the right and drag it down to highlight everything and let go of the mouse button, if we just right-click anywhere in that blue area, we have the ability to copy and paste. Clear all basically clears everything that's in that group that we actually created. So try to stay away from that. So what we're going to do, we're going to copy this. And then we come down to this one empty area, right-click there, and we're going to paste. And then all we got to do now is just change the number system. So this is going to be my motor 2, and this is going to be my pump 2. And then we have our bearings already set in place. All we have to do is just change the number of those machines. And we can go ahead and do this again, because I'm going to, I think, pump 6. So we just click and drag to highlight everything. Right-click in the blue area. We're going to copy, and then we're going to paste again. And again, all we got to do is just change the number system. So this is going to be 3. 4 and 4. And we keep doing this until we're at the very end of our route that we created on our piece of paper. And you can see that our last test point ends in 24, so we can actually validate this by coming to my route that I actually have. We have 12 machines, multiply that by 2, we got 24 points. So that coincides with what we just created here. Now before we actually hit the create button to populate this area over here in DMS, people that actually have a 9000, you would like to save it to the Excel spreadsheet. So basically what that means is that we're actually going to make a copy of this route that we just created and put it into a spreadsheet. Because on the Probe 9000, the display is really small, so you only have the ability to only see the first 8 characters. So you will only see the 8 characters of the machine. You will never see the characters of the point. So what you guys can do, the people that actually have a 9000 can actually save this to an Excel, and they can actually print that out every time they go out to do that route out in the field so that they'll never get lost. So we can actually save this. It's on my desktop. We're going to say machine room. Click on OK, and I'll show you that in a short bit. This copy from group, I'm going to come back once we actually hit the create button, but you can actually copy a group from an existing plant that you actually already have within your DMS plant folder. So you can skip this long process of trying to create individual machines and test points associated with this new group that we actually will be building in a few moments. So what we're going to do, once we actually finish creating this group, we're going to hit the create button. Now if you look over in the upper left-hand corner, there's our plant name, Building 20. If we hit the expand, there's our application level. Underneath that is our group name, machine room. And then we have all of our machines listed underneath our group. And if we come up to my group and expand all, you can see all the test points associated within my group, which I have 24 points, which is on the small side. Again, if you remember from last month, when you're creating your first route, you want to make sure that you only start off with anywhere between 75 to 100 test points. Okay? This way you have enough time to go out there, collect the data, bring it back to DMS, and then have enough time to actually analyze the data. If you get too big, you're starting to dig into your own, your other things that you got to do in your facility for that day. So you always want to try to make sure you get between 75 to 100 test points. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy a group from an existing plant and put it into this new plant that I've actually created with that I called Building 20. So what we can do is we can actually highlight our plant level, our Building 20, and if we right click, I want to do an electrical application. So if I right click on my building name, we have a box that pops up. What we're going to do is we're going to come down where it says new, and we're going to create a new application. Here it brings us right back to the new plant wizard, and if you notice, we don't have a name for our plant because we're actually creating a new application for this plant right here. So it doesn't need a name for that plant because we already have one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our application type. We're going to select electrical, and let's call this substation for my group name. I'm going to keep it at the A&E format. Click on next. And what we're going to do now, since this is empty, we're going to copy a group from an existing plant of mine. So when I actually click on the copy from group, you can actually see all the different plants I have within my DMS plant folder. Some people might have one or two plants. If you're an outside contractor, you might have several plants in this DMS plant folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my Toyota plant. And what we're going to do, we're looking for our access database. And you'll know which one is your access database because it has this icon. It looks like a piece of paper with a key over top of it. This is your access database. And this is the area that we want to copy. So I'm going to find my electrical substation right here. And what I'm going to do is just double click. Now what we just did was we just copied an existing group from an existing plant and copied it over to this new plant and new group. So within this group we actually have 4 locations or machines, and then we have our points associated with each one of these machines. Again, you can save it to an Excel. If you have a 9,000, you might want to print this out. Again, you're only going to see the first 8 characters, not the point name. So we're going to save this, call this electrical. And then we're just going to create this. Saving to Excel only is for the people with a 9,000 because people with a 10,000 and the 15,000, you'll actually have the name of the machines and then the name of the point, individual point for that one particular group. So if I minimize this and this, we can come over to my machine room and we can actually see our individual machines and our individual test points for each one of these machines. So the guys with a 9,000 again can print this out and follow this route off of this piece of paper that they actually printed out earlier so that they will not get lost. Maureen, I'm going to take a break here. I just want to see if there's any questions out there.
All right, no one's typed any in, and I don't see any hands raised, but if anybody out there is kind of digesting this and has any questions. Anybody? I think they're all still taking diligent notes.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as to proceed. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go into our communications tab. And I'm going to talk about the different options that we actually have within this communications tab. The first thing that we're going to do, if you just bought a brand new UltraProbe, what you want to do is you want to make sure that that UltraProbe is communicating with your UltraTrend DMS software. So what I have with me today is I have my UltraProbe 15,000. So if I'm a brand new user and it's my first time using this, I want to make sure that it is communicating with my DMS. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a configure probe. And what it's doing, when you actually click on configure probe, you're going to have a probe manager box that pops up. And for the first time, you're going to have this box empty. So what we're doing is we're trying to have DMS look for our SD card for our UltraProbe 15,000. It's going to assign a drive to it. And then once we find out which drive that the SD card is on, we can actually upload our route to that card so that we can actually transfer that data from our computers to our UltraProbe so that we can actually start collecting data on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on New. We have a new UltraProbe wizard that pops up, and all you got to do is just follow the directions. So we're going to hit Next. We're going to do an automatic probe detection. And basically what it does is we're actually having DMS look for our UltraProbe on its own. But if you already know where it's located, you can actually do a manual setup. So we can actually come over here to my Start menu, come to my computer. If I plug in my SD card, you can see that it's on my E drive. So I can go in there manually and say that my SD card is on my E drive and then go from there. But the most common that everybody uses is the automatic probe detection. So we click on Next. We have DMS looking for that card. Now, we have two options. We have a UP10,000 and UP15,000 on the E drive. Now, for me, I know I don't have a 10,000, so I'm going to click on the UP15,000. DMS cannot tell which UltraProbe that you have between the 10,000 and the 15,000. So you actually have to tell the DMS which version of the UltraProbes that you guys actually have. And in this case, I have an UltraProbe 15,000. So I'm going to click on Next. It's going to tell us where it's going to be added. I'm going to hit Finish. Now if you look in the Probe Manager box, we have the UP15,000 on the E drive. Now if you have multiple UltraProbes, like a 9, 10, 3,000, and so on, you can actually have a list of those UltraProbes here. And what we can do is we can actually hit the test button to make sure it is communicating with the card. And it is. If it doesn't, it's going to tell you otherwise. So if it doesn't recognize the UltraProbe, then you have to go back through and actually do New again and try to search for that UltraProbe. Now the settings over here, settings button, is basically you can actually browse to find out where the SD card is located for my 15,000 that's on my computer. Not many people use it because automatic probe detection in this probe manager finds automatically for you. So I hit OK. And if we go look down at the selected probe, you can see that we have an UltraProbe 15,000 on the E drive, and we've got a check mark here. So if you have multiple UltraProbes, you'll have a list of the UltraProbes here. And if I have let's say a 9,000 for instance, and I want to use it to do some testing, I can just come over here to my selected probe and then move this check mark from my 15,000 down to the 9,000, so it knows exactly what I'm actually using. And then again, before you guys, after we do the configure probe, from here on out, before you upload or download information to the card or to the UltraProbe, you always want to test your connection, because if you have multiple ports and you move your, let's say, your SD card around, if you got 2 or 3 different SD ports and you move it from slot to slot, it might not be communicating with the DMS, and you actually have to do a configure probe again. Okay. Now these two areas that are grayed out, the send group to probe and retrieve group from probe, this is where we're going to be uploading our route to the gun, which is the send group to probe. So we're sending our information from DMS to our UltraProbe. Once we have that uploaded to our guns, we can then go out into the field and actually start collecting data. Once we're actually done collecting that data, and we want to send that information back into DMS, we would actually have to highlight our group name and then retrieve group from probe. At that point, it will then pull that information out from your ultra probe and place it into DMS. Now, the reason why it's grayed out right now is that we don't have our group name highlighted. So if I highlight my machine, that our send group to probe and retrieve group from probe is actually blackened in. So anytime that you see this grayed out, it means that we don't have our group name highlighted. Okay? And then lastly, our clear instrument. This is just for the people that actually have an UltraProbe 9000. If you have a 9000, if you want to clear out the memory out from the 9000, you first have to make sure that your gun is set up in the setup mode. So it'll be able to actually communicate with your DMS, and then you can come over here to clear instrument, and it will then clear out the memory from that gun so that you can actually send another group or route to that gun so that you can proceed testing. Now, if you want to clear out your SD card for the 15,000 or the 10,000, then you will actually have to come over here to your computer, find out where your SD card is, open that up, and then you'll want to manually delete everything out of there. And you guys should really start doing this before you actually send a new route, because over time you'll actually create backup folders, and it'll take up space, and sometimes the old backup folders will actually corrupt the new data. So you always want to make sure that you have, before you actually send another group to your UltraProbes, you want to make sure that your card is completely empty before you proceed. So my card is cleared, and we're going to actually upload our first route to our card. So we're going to highlight our machine room, come over here to communications, test our connection, make sure it is communicating, hit OK, go back to communications, and we're going to send group to probe. Again, we're sending all this information from DMS to our card so that we can incorporate that card to our UltraProbe so that we can actually collect our data. The 15,000 might take a little bit longer than, let's say, the UltraProbe 10,000. The 15,000 takes a little bit longer because we actually are uploading the language files to the UltraProbe 15,000, because you actually have the ability to change the languages on that gun. So if you're, let's say, if you're a German from Germany, if you want to have the gun to talk to you, so to speak, in your native language, you can actually have set up to show everything that was in English into German, for instance. So that's why it's going to take a little bit longer. And plus, there's other things that it does that's a little bit technical that it'll take me too long to actually to explain all that stuff. But it will take a little bit longer to upload a route to that card than, let's say, an UltraProbe 10,000. So I actually placed my route onto my card. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to place it into my 15,000, and I'm actually going to take a simple reading. So I have it in my gun. I'm going to take a DB reading. I'm also going to take a photograph, since I have the ability to take photographs with my 15,000. And I'm going to record a quick sound file. And I'm going to take a snapshot of my sound itself. Save. Okay. So I've taken a simple reading on my 15,000. Now what I'm going to do is going to place my SD card back into my computer. And I'm going to make sure that I have my group name highlighted, machine room. Go to communications, test my connection. It sees it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to communications tab, and we're going to scroll down where it says retrieve group from probe. Now we're at a point where we're actually pulling the information out from the card and going to be placing it into DMS. Now this is like a last-ditch effort, this box that pops up. It's just going to validate, are you sure this is where you're going to this is where it's going to be placed. So if you happen to highlight the wrong group, let's say underneath this bearing application, you might have like 10 different groups here. If I have the wrong group highlighted, we can actually change it by coming down here to the group name and changing it to the correct group. Now, for this example here, I only have one group for my application, so I don't have to worry about that. And the same thing with, if you have multiple plants over here and multiple applications, you can change all that stuff. So this is like a last-ditch effort saying, this is where it's going to be dumped. Are you sure? And in this case, I'm going to say yes. So we're going to click on OK. So it's going to tell us there's one record that's been downloaded to our group. Now if we come over here to my hierarchy, and if I look underneath my machine room and go underneath my motor 1 to my first test point, which is MOB, if we open this up, we'll see our historical data of when we actually downloaded the information from our card to our DMS. So if we highlight this date here, you can see that there's a lot of boxes that are filled in. This is all the information that we collected with the 15,000. So you got a date, timestamp for when we actually took the reading, the dB level of the sound that we just recorded. The frequency is wrong. It should be 30 kilohertz because we're doing bearings. And then down here, we have our sound file. So if we want to analyze the sound, we just hit the open button and it'll launch our spectralizer so that we can actually analyze that sound. And I took images earlier for that point, and you can actually see the photograph that I took of my sound just a few moments ago. So this would be pretty important if I want to do 4-pick reports later on in the future to show, my client or my boss of what's going on with this one particular bearing. I have evidence to show him right along with some sound files. So let me see. Any questions, guys, on the communications tab and how to actually upload and download the information?
Hey Stan, we have had a few questions come in. One is kind of more for clarification. You've mentioned a couple different times kind of the different way you might need to do certain tasks if you're using the 9,000 as opposed to the 10 or 15. So just clarifying, you say 9, but does that also work for if you have a 3,000?
Well, the 3,000
steps.
Yeah, I mean the 3,000 is different from all the other digital instruments because the communication only goes one way. You can't, with the 9, 10, or the 15, you don't have the ability to actually create a route and upload that route to your 3,000. The communication only goes one way. So the 3,000 is basically built for people that are using it for, let's say, air leak surveys, gas surveys, and so on. So what they'll do is they'll take the instrument and just go out in the field and look for those leaks and collect dBs from all those leaks that they actually find. And basically all they have to do is actually create just a group level of where you were focusing in on your survey to dump that information from the 3,000 to that group so that you can actually create a survey report. That's the biggest difference, really. There's other little things that are a little bit different than the other 3 instruments, but the biggest thing is that the communication. Communication only goes one way. It goes from the instrument itself to DMS directly. You can't do it the other way around.
Okay, great. And then someone's just wondering, and maybe you can touch on this again, whether you have to configure your probe every time you do an upload and a download.
No. The only time you really have to do that, usually if you have a 15,000 or a 10,000, you have a card reader and you have it set up on one port. The 9,000, you might have to do it a couple times because you're unplugging it and plugging it into a different port, and it might assign that 9,000 to a different drive. So this is why it's so important that every time you actually plug one of your ultra probes into your computer, you always want to go to your test connection first. So if it doesn't see it, you have to go back to your configure probes and reconfigure that probe so that DMS can actually see it so that you can actually upload or download your information.
Okay. And then another one, wondering if it's okay to set up the motors and pumps as one machine with 4 different points.
It's really a preference. I mean, it's up to you guys. As long as everybody that's that's doing the same thing as you, the same group, as long as everybody's on the same page, you guys can do it that way. I mean, we give you guys that opportunity to create names whichever way that you want to do it. So if you want to do it that way, yeah, you can go ahead and do it that way. We don't limit you guys on how you guys want to set up your routes.
Okay, great. And if anybody else has any questions, pop them in or raise your hand and we can have you ask it live, but that's good for now, Stan.
Okay. That's basically it, guys.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right.
No
Anybody?
other questions?
All right. Well, the good news is that Stan is always available and happy to answer questions anytime. So if you think of something after we pop off of this, you can always contact him or anybody else, and we can track down an answer for you and walk you through how to do what it is you're asking. So if that's it, Stan, I'll take the screen back over from you, and if any questions come in the meantime, I'll obviously ask. So just wanted to follow up with to close up with some dates to make you aware of. We've got our next monthly webinar coming up September 18th, and we're going to be talking about planning and scheduling. So that should be a really good one, and we're very close to having our October, November, December webinars scheduled. So hopefully we'll be able to start announcing those for you all to mark on your calendars here soon. And as I said, we'll likely run this part 2 training again, so if you had a colleague that couldn't sit in on it, or you want to sit through it again just to try and soak up more information, look for that to be sometime in September, and then of course we'll be rolling out part 3 here shortly as well, so keep your eyes open for that. And then always like to throw out the dates for our Ultrasound World Conference, May 13th through 16th next year in Clearwater, Florida. And this might be new for some of you, though hopefully everybody received our email announcement about it, but just want to make sure everybody's aware that we are rolling out a brand new conference that we're going to co-locate with Ultrasound World, and it's going to be called Reliable Asset World, and we're really going to have an entire conference dedicated to asset health, reliability, all these great topics like planning and scheduling and things like that. We're putting together a really great agenda for that. So obviously check that out. ReliableAssetWorld.com is the website for that conference. And again, it's co-located with Ultrasound World. So if you're able to come to one or the other, you'll get the benefit of maybe sitting in on some of the sessions for each conference. So just want to make you aware of that. And then I'll put up our contact us information here. And with that, I'll leave it here, and if anybody has any additional questions, just let us know, shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'll get back to you.